Like maybe the center lights?
Yes. Yeah, we can. Yeah,
Okay.
we can dim some of the lights.
Yeah.
If you want to run back and ask Margaret to do that.
All right, well, I just want to take a minute here and welcome you guys all to the library and say thank you for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lindsay Tuman. I'm the library director. Today we are pleased to welcome Dr. Gene Chavez for his presentation, Flower Power. The program today is brought to us by the Kansas Humanities Council, which is a nonprofit organization that connects communities with history, traditions, and ideas to strengthen civic life. And Dr. Chavez is the founder and president of Chavez and Associates. He received his master's in cross-cultural counseling and his doctorate in the Philosophical Foundations of Education from Arizona State University. Dr. Chavez consults with groups throughout the country on bilingual education and cultural diversity. Since 1995, he's been an active member of the Kansas Humanities Council Speakers Bureau and serves as a discussion leader for Talk About Literature in Kansas. Dr. Chavez is joining us today to discuss the history of Mexican immigration to Kansas and the journey of the tortilla. And also, before we get started, we ask that you take a moment to turn off your phones or put them on silent, please. And then please join me in welcoming Dr. Chavez.
Thank you. Buenas tardes, ¿cómo están todos? Bien llenos, listos para la presentación. Muy bien. Vamos a comenzar en inglés o en español, o los dos. Los dos. Okay. Well, we're celebrating Hispanic History Month, September 15th through October 15th. Anybody know why we celebrate those dates, September 15th through October 15th?
Independence Day?
Say it again?
Independence Day?
Oh, okay. So when is that?
September 15th?
Okay. And when you say Independence Day, was that the United States Independence Day?
No.
Okay. It was the day in Mexico and other Latin American countries, especially Central America, after they threw off the yoke of Spanish bondage for 300 years, from 1521 to 1821, when the Mexican independence took place. That is a significant date, not only for Mexicans, but for other Latinos, especially those from Central America. South American independence really didn't happen until a later date. Anybody know who was the great leader of the Mexican War of Independence? Who launched that war? Any of you know that? I'm expecting my A students up here. Okay. Have you heard of Father Hidalgo y Costilla? Yeah. Father Hidalgo was a parish priest in a little place called Dolores, and on the evening of the 15th, he called the parishioners together and incited them to basically take up their arms, whatever arms they had. They didn't have many, pitchforks or whatever they could do, and rout the Spanish from Mexico, because basically the wealthy people of Mexico were like a 2% group of people, sort of like today, who had all of the lands, the haciendas, as they called them in Mexico. And they encouraged the people to revolt against Spain. And that war of independence took place, or is commemorated every September 15th in Mexico by the tolling of the bells, not only in Dolores, which is now the state of Hidalgo, named after Father Hidalgo. And so that date is very important, the evening of the 15th, and then we celebrate the actual Independence Day on September 16th. Other Central American countries also do that as well. By the way, Mexico is not a Central American country, it is in North America. So when we talk about Mexico, it's really part of North America. And has the largest city in North America. What city is that?
Mexico City.
Mexico City, yeah. 21 million people. So when we think about independence, we also need to think about other kinds of things that took place in Latin America that really has driven the migration of people from their homeland north, al norte, as they say it in Mexico, to find not only security, but economic opportunities for themselves and their families. And often when they flee a country at war, it is primarily for security, for the purpose of security. But of course, economic opportunity is also a very important part of living and allowing your family to survive. So as we think about this very important date in history, and by the way, the October 15th really has to do with Columbus Day, which now is no longer a floating holiday, but when I was your age, Columbus Day was a floating holiday, and we usually celebrated it on October 15th. But now, in October, Columbus Day is always on a Monday. So that's kind of what we've done in this country, is make our major holidays on a Monday, so people have the weekend and can celebrate the Monday if they're lucky enough to get off work and school. So, and throughout Latin America, Columbus Day, which commemorates here in the United States the coming of Christopher Columbus in the 3 ships provided to him by Queen Isabella of Spain, the Niña Pinta and Santa Maria, the ships mostly loaded with sailors from Castilla, and that's why we speak Castellano, by the way, because there are 5 major languages in Spain. And right now, the people from Catalan, who speak Catalan, from Catalunya, are trying to separate themselves from those Castellano speakers and make their own country, because their language really is different, but Barcelona is their major city. So when we think about the impact of Christopher Columbus's voyage, financed by the Catholic King and Queen of Spain, who had united Spain to drive the Moors and the Jews out of Spain, we see that it's a very important date to commemorate. However, there's not a flip side to that. By Christopher Columbus coming and bringing all of the havoc that took place among the indigenous people of the Americas, native people tend to think of Columbus Day as a day to mourn, because that's when they lost their culture. And that's the very theme that Father Hidalgo took up when he was preaching to his Indian and mestizo Mexican parishioners. And I'm going to use a word that some of you know in a different context, but this is a word coming from the priest. He said, "Hijos de la chingada, levantaos," in Old Spanish, "contra los gauchupines." So what was he saying? Hijos de la chingada. When we hit something hard to crack it open, what do we call that? Dale un chingazo. ¿Que no? Okay, so that's really how the word originated, a chingazo. So he's saying, children of the having been hit hard by the Spanish, now is the time to throw off their yoke of bondage and become an independent nation. And so that's how the Mexican independence got started back in 1810 and lasted to 1821. So another very important date in Mexican history is the period of the Mexican Revolution, 1910 to 1921. How many of you are native Kansans, born and raised in Kansas? Okay. How many of your parents were native Kansans, those same ones that raised your hand? Okay. All right, so there's 2, and most of the Hispanic kids that I see here were, your parents probably came from Mexico or some other Latin country. Is that right? Yeah. Or tal vez ustedes también vinieron de allá, de otro país. Maybe some of you also came from another country. But we are a nation of immigrants, and the largest immigration of Mexican and other Latinos, but especially Mexicans, was during that period of 1910 to 1921, and then it extended on to 1930. Over 1 million Mexicans left Mexico and migrated north to work in the United States. They were met at the border, not with militiamen trying to keep them out. They were met at the border with contractors who said, hey, we want you to work the betabel. Sign here. We want your whole family. Everybody knows what betabel is, right? Betabel it means beets, but what they meant is sugar beets. Sugar beets were a huge crop in Kansas, Nebraska, southern Colorado, even in southern part of Wyoming, over into Nebraska, it was like a crescent. Great sugar plant operations took place through the manufacturing through Great Western Sugar Company. And so many Mexicans during that period of time were contracted to not only pick sugar beets, but they were hired to sow the sugar beets. Then they would make the route sowing, putting in the seed. They'd come back and they would hoe them. And the hoes that they were used were little short hoes, so they had to bend over all day long, chopping away the weeds and cultivating the plants, taking out the extra plants so that one plant could produce a lot of sugar beets. In the National Museum of American History, there's an exhibit right now of the Mexicans who came to work the sugar beets, which was like my dad's family. My dad was actually born in a railroad car outside of Pueblo, Colorado, because his family were working the betabel, and they moved him around in houses built on tracks. And so they would plant, then they'd come back and cultivate, and then they'd come back and harvest. And then usually in winter, if they had enough money saved up, they went on back to Mexico to enjoy their family and the fruits of their labor, and then would return for the next cycle of the sugar beet operation. Another person that was waiting at the border to welcome Mexicans in the country during the period of 1910 to 1921 was railroad contractors. They needed people to help build the railroads. Santa Fe, Topeka, Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe railroads, which is now Northern, Burlington Northern, and the Santa Fe is how they are now, since Burlington Northern purchased them. So when we think about the role of the Mexican in the building of the state that we're in, Kansas, as well as other states where they reside, it's been tremendous. And so the railroads were built basically by Mexican families. Wherever Mexican families settled, went to work, they often settled, they brought their families, and they worked for railroad companies like Burlington Northern, like the Santa Fe, like the Union Pacific Railroads. And this country back then was not allowing any more Asians who had helped build the Transcontinental Railroad, but because of anti-Asian sentiment in the country, Asians were no longer allowed. So guess who was welcome? Your parents, your grandparents, if you're Latino, and especially from Mexico. So as we think about that, the migration of people, they brought their food with them. So the tortilla is one of those foods that was ubiquitous among Mexican immigrants. But guess what? There were no tortillas. How many of you make your own tortillas? Can I see your hand? Okay, a couple, three. All right. My mom used to make the best tortillas, and until she passed away. And I'll have a story for you, and I want you to be thinking about a story you want to tell about tortilla. And as we complete the presentation in a little bit. So when we think about the history of tortilla, we ask, well, where did it come from? How did the tortilla evolve? Well, we really have to go back to Spain and the Mediterranean region, south of Spain and northern Africa. The Arab world inhabited Spain for 750 years. 750 years. Think of that. So much of the Castellano language, for example, and especially other languages like Andalus, which is another language in southern Spain, the language developed around words that the Arabs taught them. For example, when we say, I hope it doesn't rain today, what do we say? In Spanish, Castellano. Do you ever say, I always say, ojalá que no llueve, or llueva. Ojalá. What do we say when we say ojalá? I would to Allah, I hope to God that it doesn't rain. There's one example of how the Arab world influenced the Castellano language and other Spanish languages because they inhabited Spain for 750 years. But what the Spaniards saw is the Mediterranean people from northern Africa making a little cake, patting it, and it was made out of chickpea. Everybody know what chickpea is? Garbanzo, yeah. Garbanzo beans, okay? So they made their little tortillitas, the Spanish called them, out of garbanzo beans. Okay? And we know it as what today? Hummus, yeah. And we use to dip it up like a tortilla, what we call tortilla, the pita bread. Okay. All right, so that influence from northern Africa and the Mediterranean region entered into Spain, and it became a very popular dish or food in Spain, and the Spanish called it tortillita, which means what? Little tort, or little tortilla, yeah. Whenever you have ita on something, it means little, like Juanita, little John. Yeah. So in some parts of Spain, they still use the word torta, but they mean it in a different way. And there they mean it like an egg omelet. So they may say, what would you like for breakfast? Oh, I'll take a torta. What they're talking about is an omelet. Or if they just want a small one, they might say a tortilla. I'd like a tortilla, small omelet. Okay. So in Spain, that meaning of tortillita has changed a little bit, but guess what? They brought the idea of the tortilla to the Americas, and from the Americas, it took off in unexpected directions. Now, the indigenous people of Mesoamerica, and by the way, indigenous people have come to understand that they embraced the term Indian, whereas for a long time they said, well, no, call them Native Americans or indigenous people. But what they realized is that the word indigenous comes from a Spanish phrase, este pueblo está en Dios, como nosotros, los católicos. Okay? So the priests, and especially Isabella, who was a very staunch Catholic, said, I don't want you to enslave the people that you find wherever you lay your feet in the Americas, and if you do, you're going to reap the harsh consequences. Well, guess what? Christopher Columbus, on his third voyage, actually allowed his men to enslave the indigenous people. Because, again, the word indigenous comes from the phrase in Dios. Ellos están en Dios. They're in God, just like we are. Okay? They're the human race. They're part of God's humanity. Están en Dios, como nosotros. So, as he allowed his men to enslave the people of the Americas, he was taken back to Spain in chains because of allowing them to and basically died pauper, even though he had discovered all of the things that we call America today, the places we call America today. But what they did find is the indigenous people of the Americas making an unleavened flat bread from ground maize. Maíz, we say in Spanish. Okay. Have any of you ever tried to make masa out of cornmeal? What do you make it out of? I mean, like cornmeal that you find in, like you make your corn muffins. You can't, cornmeal will not stick together and make masa. You can bake it with flour and it becomes like corn muffins or cornbread. But corn by itself will not produce that coagulation that masa makes. What the Spanish discovered is that the Indians had figured out by soaking their corn in lime or lye, L-Y-E, lye, okay, that in fact that leached. And by the way, lye comes from pouring water over wood ashes. And did you ever hear the expression, I'm going to wash your mouth out with lye soap? Some of you older guys know about that. Yeah, lye soap is a cleansing agent. Lye is a cleansing agent. It's a high alkaline compound that comes from leaching wood ash. And the Indians had figured out they could soak their corn in this lime water after it's been leached. And they could also then rinse off the lye and then be able to cook it, because now you could form the corn into masa, because it now changed it chemically. And so the indigenous people of the Americas had figured that out and were making tortillas made out of corn, leached corn, or rather a lye-soaked corn that would produce a masa. In Mexico, in the Nahuatl language, they call it laxcali. Laxcali. Let's try saying that. Laxcali. Yeah. That's the Nahuatl language that was predominant in central Mexico when the Spanish came. But in other parts, in Central America, for example, they called this flatbread they were making pupusa. Any of you from Central America? Okay. You know about pupusa, right? Yeah. How do you make your pupusa?
I don't make them, I just eat them.
You just eat them. All right. Yeah, it's the same principle. It's corn that has been turned into, in English we call it hominy. So a lot of the other settlers lived on hominy because that was one way to preserve the corn and use it in a different way than just, say, grinding it into cornbread. They were able to make a masa out of, and hominy by itself is pretty good. And it's in my favorite dish every Saturday morning. Menudo. You got it. Yeah. So, yeah, the pozole is what they called it, and that's really the corn. So the pozole is the hominy corn that is produced through that process. And it's called nixtamalization. That's what the formal name of that process. Have you ever seen a flour, or rather a corn tortilla mix called Nixamix or something like that? Nixamix? Yeah. And that's where the word comes from making that corn into hominy. So it can be used in different ways. In South America, they found that the Indian people were using arepe, which was another kind of flatbread. Now, when Hernan Cortez, who landed in the state of Veracruz, what is today the state of Veracruz, in 1920, he marched his soldiers conquering the various Indian tribes as he went, or getting them to become his allies to go up against the great Mexica civilization. We call the Mexica, and by the way, Mexica is the word, the Indian tribe that we get the word Mexico from. So they were able to conquer the Mexica. Moctezuma was one of the great chieftains of the Mexica people. And the other people called them Azteca because they said those are the belligerent ones, Aztecas. They called themselves Mexicas. And so when he finally got to Mexico, what is today Mexico City. Then it was the great city of Tenochtitlan on the lake, around the lake of Texcoco was the name of the lake that Mexico City is built upon. And so as he went around the city, he said, this city, talking about the great Tenochtitlan of the Mexica, has many public squares, and in which are situated markets and other places for buying and selling, where are daily assembled more than 60,000 souls, and where are found all kinds of merchandise that would the world afford, embracing the necessities of life. And there's what he was talking about, their bread, the necessities of life. So for instance, articles of food, maize or Indian corn, and the grain in other forms of bread. So that's a rough translation from his Spanish. So in other words, he was saying he was seeing these Indian people making the tortillas out of the masa that they produce from their maize or maíz. So when you think about the traditional tortilla making, it starts by soaking the corn in lime water and then grinding the maize with a stone mano and metate, the way you see the Indian woman doing here. The girl packs out the masa and then puts it on the comal and begins to cook it until it's golden brown and delicious, right? Now, if I can get this to work, whoops, we're going to see a tortilla factory in operation. Who's our technology student here? The video. So this is a tortilleria. Those are 30-pound balls of masa. The masa comes from the soaked corn that's then ground in this grinding machine, and it spits out the ground masa, and there's a worker there gathering it up into 30-pound balls of masa. That's what the masa looks like after it's been ground. Cornmeal would not stick together that way, so it has to be that made into hominy first, or pozole. Then the 30-pound bolones, go into the ovens, the press and the oven. So you see how that ball is now being cut out. And by the way, if they're making chips, they have other cutters that cut the chips into rectangles or other kinds of things. So other shapes, like the round chips. And as they go through the hornos, the ovens, they're cooked on both sides at once. So there's fire up above and the fire below that grate as it goes through the conveyor belt. This particular factory in Kansas City, Kansas, makes over 40,000 tortillas a day that it distributes to restaurants and stores in the Kansas City metropolitan area. And they only have a small part of the tortilla market. There are other tortillerias. Now, do you have a tortilleria that makes corn tortillas here in Liberal that you know of?
Tú las haces no para el memorial.
Hacen tortillas de harina, ¿no?
Sí, maíz, pero like they,
But they
I
don't
think they
make
closed. Didn't
they
they?
don't make the masa like that. Like they just buy the mix.
Uh-huh.
And make it.
Oh, okay, it's like a mix. Of,
Like in the best market, they have that one thing where you could see them putting the tortilla on the.
right. So you see them, packing the tortillas in boxes. They load them into trucks and then distribute them throughout the city. You can actually go to the tortilleria too, and I love a story that a friend of mine, she's a poet, Dr. Carmen Tafoya, she said that she went into the tortilleria one time, and there was a real old hunchback lady behind the counter, and she looked to be 90 years old. And she said, well, ¿tienen algunas tortillas frescas? So she came, Mamá, tenemos tortillas frescas. So how old was the mom if she was that looked at? Okay, so we'll get out of that. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, let's go back a little bit to the history. Under Philip II of Spain, from 1527 to 1598, this was a descendant of Queen Isabella and that household of the Habsburgs. During this period of time, Spain experienced its greatest hegemony and expansion all over the world. And so from Spain, you see in the little inset up there, you see that their empire basically covered all of South America, Central America, North America, all the way up to Santa Fe, New Mexico, over, and then a town north of Santa Fe called Trinidad, all the way to the coast, and that was all considered the viceroyalty of New Spain. Now they also owned territory up in other places where you see some of the dark spots, and including the Philippine Islands became part of Spain, as did Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. All of those were Spanish territories. And that all happened during Philip II's reign in Spain. But an important part of that hegemony was a group of people who were called Sephardic Jews. Serafitas, in Spanish we call them. The Sephardic Jews were people who lived in Spain for many centuries. How many of you have ever read the story of Jonah in the Bible? Yeah. So where Jonah was going was to Tarshish, which was the Iberian Peninsula. Okay. So it goes way back to ancient times that the Jews had been going to Tarshish or Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, for many centuries. Okay. So the Jews, there were a lot of Jews who had settled in Spain, especially during the reign, 750-year reign of the Arab world, Caliphate, that inhabited Spain. And so the Jews and Arabs lived side by side in relative peace. They didn't fight against each other. It was the Christians fighting against the Arabs that most of the fighting took place. For centuries. Yeah, they had scrimmages all the time. And it wasn't until Isabella and Fernando got married that they were able to unite the Christian kingdoms against the Arabs. And in the same year that she commissioned Christopher Columbus, 1492, she signed the Treaty of Cordoba with the Caliphate of the Arab world, and Spain became a Christian nation in 1492. But Isabella, out of her zealousness for the Catholic religion, said, if your Jewish people are welcome to stay in Spain, as are Arab people, Islamic people, if they become Christians. You're welcome to stay. If you're not willing to become Christians, then, and they called them conversos, that you were willing to convert. If you're not, then you need to get the heck out of Dodge. Oh, no, it wasn't Dodge, it was Cordoba. Yeah. So a lot of Jews during the period of Isabella and then later during Philip came to the New World And a lot of them settled in this northern part of the kingdom because of the viceroyalty of New Spain, because it was relatively uninhabited and they could continue practicing Judaism without the visitor, and they called him that, visitor, who would come to the villages and make sure everybody was being good Catholics during the imperial days. And they could practice their Judaism. And so a lot of these Sephardic Jews, that is Spanish-speaking Jews, they saw these Indians making this bread, smelled great, but they said, wait a minute, the Spaniards are feeding the corn to the pig. Therefore we can't eat pig. We don't eat pigs, so we can't eat the corn. So they saw it as pig food rather than a kosher dish. Everybody understand kosher among the Jewish people? Sort of like halal among Arab people. So in other words, it has to be blessed by a rabbi. It also has to have certain standards of purity. And so the Jews decided they would not eat the tortilla that the Indians were making. So what did they do? They started growing wheat, and they started making flour tortillas de harina. And that's where what you ate today in your burrito was a tortilla de harina made from wheat flour, not corn. And so if you go to northern Mexico, that's where the flour tortilla prevails. You go to southern parts of Mexico, they don't. You ask for a tortilla de harina, they'll look at you like, wait a minute, you're not from here, are you? We don't serve those. But guess what? As people migrated, because there weren't the tortilla manufacturing places that we have today, the tortillerias, it was hard for them to get corn tortillas. So all up and down the Midwest, especially where people from northern Mexico came, they're used to using flour tortillas. You probably can go to some restaurants right here in Liberal where they're going to make their chips out of tortillas, flour tortillas. They're going to make their taco shells out of flour tortillas. They make their enchiladas out of flour tortillas. Are there any restaurants like that here? Or is it all that puro de maíz? Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the first immigrants that came because they didn't have access to the corn tortilla making operations, and it was too hard for them to make, to do all the processes that it takes to make corn tortillas in large numbers. They reverted to flour tortillas. So even all the way up to, say, Omaha, Nebraska, Des Moines, Iowa, you go into a Mexican restaurant and they're serving their signature dishes made out of tortillas de harina, flour tortillas. And that was the phenomenon of not having the tortilleria operation. So, wheat flour tortillas were an innovation of these exiled Jews, and because they did not consider it necessary. Now, I need to ask you, how many of you prefer corn tortillas over flour tortillas? Let's see your hand. How many prefer flour tortillas? I'm going to raise my hand because that's all my mom ever made. And there was no tortillerias in my neighborhood. Okay. So these converso Jews, it actually became a regional staple in northern Mexico. Now, let's talk about tortillas in the future. Americans continue to crave Mexican food. Why else would we serve it in a library where there's no eating and drinking? Right? So much so that they spend billions of dollars annually at quick service restaurants like Taco Bell and Chipotle Mexican Grill, and on Mexican food in their local grocery stores. And think of all the ways they've changed the tortilla. You can get spinach tortillas. You can get jalapeno tortillas. You can get pimento and cheese tortillas. I don't know what else they can get. But they don't call them tortillas. What do they call them? Wraps. Wraps. It's like changing our names. My name is Genoveva, but when I went to school, they said, well, we can't say that, Genoveva. What does that mean? Well, it means beginning of life. Well, what's your middle name? Teodoro. Given of God. Oh, okay. Can we call you Ted? Have it the first name? Yes, T-shirt. You can call me Ted. So they changed the name. So now tortillas are wraps. And you can have a lettuce wrap or a tuna wrap or whatever kind of wrap you want to have. Whatever happened to the old good frijoles cocidos en la olla con un poco de manteca, ajo, cebolla. And there's a real burrito, right? So authentic Mexican restaurants and food products still are being distributed and continue to grow. The tortilla production in this country last 2 years ago, and I haven't kept up with that statistics, is over a $12 billion industry annually. 12 billion. I just read from MITIA, that is the Tortilla Industry Association, and I call it MITIA. So the last time I read the newsletter from MITIA, tortillas have now outpaced all other breads in the United States, including pita bread, including Wonder Bread, including Bimbo's sliced bread. So we now have in this country a nation that is fixed on the tortilla. And aren't we lucky if we still have somebody that makes homemade tortillas at our own comal? Yeah. But I have to go all the way to New Mexico to get that. Okay, now, your favorite tortilla story as we close. But before we close, I did want to, can you minimize that and pull up a Google search that I did for this or escape. And then there should be that. So you thought I was lying when I said, so we probably have to escape out of this. Yeah, you can exit on something. Okay, so here is something I wanted to share with you as students. TIA, Tortilla Institute Industry Association, which is a not-for-profit association. Don't you love this tortilla head here? Smiling face. TIA is a international organization. They held their last conference in Seville, in Barcelona, Spain last year. Thousands of people attended. Who attends and are members of TIA? The members of TIA are tortilla manufacturers, people who distribute tortillas, people who are interested in the transportation laws. Tortillas are now becoming a worldwide phenomenon. So tortillas are out there, and it's a growing industry. Any of you interested in some sort of business? Tortilla business is a good business to get into. The association gives annual scholarships of $1,000 to people who are interested in the tortilla, other than eating it, but how to manufacture it. There are organizations in Kansas. I did a presentation in Kansas City not too long ago, and they said, oh, wow, we at the Sowers Institute, which is a research institute, Sowers Institute, are researching new kinds of flour, including gluten-free and other kinds of flours that we want to introduce to the industry so that they have a different opportunity to take in tortillas that maybe aren't so fattening, right? I don't know. But they're still as good, hopefully. But this is, you can go online, just go to Tortilla Industry Association, and you can look up this scholarship and see if you might qualify. Anybody need $1,000 for school next semester? There it is. All right. And other scholarships that I'm sure are involved. Now, let's go back to my favorite story, tortilla story. But before I tell you mine, what's your favorite tortilla story? How many of you ever saw the movie Napoleon Dynamite? Yeah. And I love the statement that one of the kids made. They're rushing out somewhere, and Pedro's going to drive them, I think, or something. And they said, well, can't I even just finish my dang quesadilla? So here it was, eating a quesadilla and needing the nourishment. So I think this kid lived on quesadillas. But your favorite story, anybody? How many of you have a favorite place to buy your tortillas? What brand do you buy? Any?
I can say nobody by themselves. I put butter and then jalapeno juice.
Okay, all right, cool.
From the best
Yeah.
market.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Right?
They're
They're
big
so good.
tortillas.
They were so
Mm.
Like the flour ones.
Okay.
Well, I have a little story about tacos. My sister and her husband went to live in Australia. There's no Hispanic anybody in our family. But they always, for Christmas Eve, would make tacos. And they couldn't find anything to make tacos with in Australia, so she asked me to send masa harina.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent it to her, and they didn't get it, and they didn't get it, and they didn't get it, but it was like March after Christmas. By the time they finally got their package, because we put a tracer on, but that was how far she had to look for
Wow.
to get the
Yeah.
flour to make tortillas.
That's
And
interesting.
she,
Do they still live there? It would be interesting to see if they're able to get it in a grocery store now.
I bet she did.
Yeah.
This was 20, 30
Yeah.
years ago.
Well, I'll end with this. My favorite story is that one time my wife and I and our kids were visiting relatives in Kansas City, but we were going to school at Arizona State in Tempe. So it was Christmas time. We had spent Christmas with her side of the family, and we were headed back to Phoenix. My side of the family was coming in, and we were going to spend New Year's with them. But we got caught in a snowstorm in the White Mountains in northern Arizona. So we were delayed getting there. But I called my folks and I said, go ahead and go on over. They were coming from LA. And the keys underneath the mat, and where we normally keep it. You can just go ahead and go on in and relax and so forth. Finally, we got home, and my mom had all big stack of tortillas on the table, ready, covered, of course, with dish towel. And she had chile verde, de carne de puerco. She had chile colorado, de carne de res. And she had frijoles, de olla. I mean, everything. She had gone all out to make a wonderful. And I said, Mom, how did you make the tortillas? Because she always used a little palito that not too much bigger than a broom handle. And I said, where did you get it? We didn't have one. I was going to go get you one. No, I just had your dad cut that broom handle off. We kept that broom for a long time. I remind her of her making the tortillas. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you for your appreciation. I know some of you have to get to class, so give yourself a hand.